Right now, you're wearing clothes. So am I. So is nearly every human being on Earth at this exact moment. In cities, in deserts, in the Arctic, in the tropics. It feels like the most obvious thing in the world. But here's the strange part. Humans are the only species on the planet that regularly covers its own skin. And for most of our evolutionary history, we didn't. We were naked apes walking around a hostile planet with no fur to speak of. So when did that change? And more importantly, why? The answer isn't in any historical record, because clothes rot. They don't fossilize. There is no ancient tunic buried in a cave waiting to be carbon dated. Scientists had to solve this mystery using something you would never expect: lice. Let's start with the body. Around 7 million years ago, when our ancestors split from the ancestors of chimpanzees, we were covered in hair, just like every other primate. But somewhere along the way, we lost almost all of it. Anthropologists believe this happened because early humans in the East African savanna were active hunters, chasing prey for long distances in open sun. A furry body traps heat. A bare body covered in sweat glands can cool itself far more efficiently. So natural selection favored humans who ran hotter, sweated more, and carried less fur. It was a brilliant adaptation for surviving as a daytime hunter on the equator. It was a terrible adaptation for surviving anywhere else. Because once humans started migrating out of Africa, hairless skin became a liability. Northern Europe, the Asian steppe, and the depths of an ice age are not forgiving to a bare-skinned primate. Something had to fill the gap that fur used to fill, and that something was clothing. But figuring out exactly when humans started wearing it seemed for a long time like an impossible question. Skins and furs decompose within years, not millennia. There was nothing to dig up. Then, in 2003, a team of biologists found a way around the problem entirely by studying something that had been living on human bodies the whole time. Lice come in two main varieties that infest humans: head lice, which live in your hair, and body lice, which live in clothing and only visit the skin to feed. Body lice cannot survive without fabric. They lay their eggs in the seams of clothes, not in hair, which means body lice as a distinct species could not have existed until humans started wearing something. Mark Stoneking, a geneticist at the Max Planck Institute, realized that if he could measure how long ago body lice genetically diverged from head lice, he would effectively be measuring how long ago clothing was invented. He and his colleague Ralph Kittler sequenced the DNA of both louse populations and calculated their mutation rate, the same technique used to estimate when different species branched apart on the evolutionary tree. Their result, published in Current Biology, placed the split at somewhere between 83,000 and 170,000 years ago. A separate study by a team led by David Reed in 2011, using a different genetic clock, arrived at a strikingly similar window, roughly 83,000 to 170,000 years ago as well. Two independent methods, two independent research groups, and they landed on the same era. That is when clothing was born. Here's what makes that number so interesting. Anatomically modern humans, people who looked essentially like us, had already existed for over 100,000 years by that point, which means for tens of thousands of years, our species walked the earth completely naked, the same way our ancestors always had. Clothing wasn't there from the beginning, it was a later invention, and it appeared at almost exactly the moment our ancestors needed it most. Because 100,000 years ago, the planet was sliding into one of the harshest periods of the last ice age. Ian Gilligan, an archaeologist at the University of Sydney who has spent years studying the origins of clothing, proposed a theory that reframes the entire story. He argued that clothing wasn't invented for modesty, and it wasn't invented for decoration. Those uses came much later. Clothing was invented as thermal technology, full stop. It was a survival tool, no different in purpose than fire or a spear, built to solve one problem. How do you keep a hairless body alive when the temperature drops below freezing for months at a time? Gilligan found something that supports this in the archaeological record itself. Stone tool assemblages from Africa and Eurasia show a distinct spike in a particular kind of tool right around the coldest points of the Ice Age. Scrapers. Hide scrapers are used to clean the flesh and fat off animal skins, the essential first step in turning a dead animal into wearable material. When Gilligan mapped the frequency of these scraper tools against the climate record, they moved together almost in lockstep. Colder periods, more scrapers. Warmer periods, fewer scrapers. Humans were only investing serious effort into hide preparation when the weather demanded it. Then there's the direct evidence from Neanderthals. For a long time, scientists assumed our closest extinct relatives wore basically nothing, or at best draped a raw skin over themselves. But Neanderthals lived through brutally cold European winters for hundreds of thousands of years, and recent research suggests they were more sophisticated than they've been given credit for. Bone tools resembling owls used to pierce hide to create tighter, tailored garments rather than simply loose wraps have been found at Neanderthal sites in France. This matters because a draped skin and a fitted sewn garment are two completely different levels of technology. A draped skin lets cold air leak in at every gap. A fitted garment traps a layer of warm air against the body. That distinction is the difference between surviving an ice age and not. But the real leap came later, with a tool so small it's easy to overlook entirely: the needle. In 2016, archaeologists working at Denisova Cave in Siberia recovered a bone needle with a deliberately drilled eye, dated to roughly 50,000 years ago, one of the oldest of its kind ever found. A needle with an eye means thread. Thread means seams. Seams mean tailored garments, garments cut and fitted to the shape of a human body rather than simply wrapped around it. This single artifact represents a massive leap in insulation technology, and its timing is not a coincidence. It appears right as modern humans were pushing into some of the coldest, most extreme environments our species had ever attempted to occupy, including the door to the Arctic. And this is where the story connects back to something almost nobody expects. It might be the reason we're here at all. Neanderthals lived in Europe for far longer than modern humans did before we arrived. They were physically more cold-adapted than we were, stockier, with better heat retention built directly into their bodies. And yet, they went extinct roughly 40,000 years ago, while modern humans, arriving from a warmer climate with hairless, sweaty, heat-dumping bodies, thrived and spread across the same frozen landscape. Some researchers, including Gilligan, have proposed that superior clothing technology may have been one of the decisive advantages. If Neanderthals were still relying on simple draped hides, while modern humans had figured out sewn, layered, fitted garments, that gap in thermal engineering could have meant the difference between one species surviving an ice age and another one not. So clothing wasn't a fashion statement. It wasn't invented because someone felt embarrassed. It was invented because a naked, sweaty, heat-dumping primate needed a way to survive somewhere the sun couldn't save it anymore. And it worked so well that it may have helped determine which human species got to keep existing. The origins of modesty and decoration came afterward, layered on top of a technology that was originally, at its core, about staying alive through a night that never seemed to end. Every time you put on a jacket, you are repeating an act that some anonymous ancestor performed for the very first time, somewhere between 83,000 and 170,000 years ago, out of nothing but skins, sinew, and the need to make it through winter. You'll never know their name, but you're still wearing what they invented.